you can do the best marketing in the world, but if you're not enabling sales, it doesn't matter. For a very long time in my career, I hid who I was. And I hid who I was exactly because of some of the societal pressures I think that you're sort of alluding to. I never really hid like being queer. It wasn't something that I tried to hide. And it wasn't something, I've worked for a long time in the Boston area. It was never something I needed to hide.
Welcome to the podcast, where we introduce you to incredible humans who share their journeys with the mission to inspire you to harness your own inner tenacity to drive your life and career forward. And now, your host, Adam Posner.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast, where I bring you the best and the brightest from world of business, marketing, and personal growth to help you harness your inner tenacity and drive your career forward. Folks, I have a great guest today, Sarah Reynolds. Sarah is an award-winning B2B SaaS marketing powerhouse and a champion of inclusive people-first growth strategies. With over a decade of experience leading global marketing programs, Sarah has consistently delivered transformative results in modern companies. Currently the CMO at HiBob's. They previously held leadership roles at Udacity, Salary.com, and PTC, excelling in pipeline generation, messaging, and team development, along with innovating along the way. And openly queer, trans, and non-binary, Sarah leverages their platform to challenge stereotypes and advocate for inclusivity in the workplace. They passionately promote inclusive language to combat unconscious bias and foster belonging. I love all of this. I am thrilled to have you on the show. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
And I've been chasing you for a long time, as a guest, and I mean that in the least creepy kind of way, because you have a fascinating journey as a marketer and a leader in the HR tech space, and I'm excited to have you on. So I want to hit the rewind button for a moment here, and like all marketers, when we came out of the womb, we weren't always like, wow, marketing SaaS. Well, maybe SaaS is a good kind of baby word. SaaS. You don't want to be, or you don't want to, SaaS. We're digressing today, but
I still sound like that.
Tell us a little bit about your upbringing. When did you first get the marketing itch? Was it something in college? Was it something afterwards? When did you decide that I want to get into marketing?
So I was someone who never really knew what they wanted to be when they grew up. I come from a STEM family. My dad's an electrical engineer. My mom went to MIT for bio. My sister's a veterinarian. I'm the black sheep. I did university degrees in history and classics, which for those playing at home is more history and dead languages.
Yeah.
And my folks were like, holy crap, this kid is never going to get off our couch in our basement. And they really didn't sort of understand that as like a university track. And they definitely didn't understand when after graduating, I was like, throw away that fancy degree. I think I want to go to culinary school. So I am a proud culinary school dropout. I actually developed a gluten allergy during a baking unit. And I ended up working in Boston tech. And I ended up working at an ed tech company, so sort of adjacent to HR tech, which is where I am now. And I was working in a really small company, 10 people. I was a BDR. I was terrible at being a BDR. I have such respect for business development reps because I was really bad at that job. It was not for me.
What were you bad at though? Was it the cold calling? Was it what aspect?
Yeah, like cold calling. I think I'm like in that generation where like the phone, like we want everything to be in text. So reaching out to people and cold calling them was definitely really difficult. And then just, I think, selling, I like the closing motion was not something necessarily that came naturally to me. Making conversation with people always did, but the actual like close of the sale was difficult for me. So one day, 10-person company, one day the one person working in marketing leaves and the CEO walks over to my desk and says, "You're not very good at this job, but you seem really smart. And I think you can figure this marketing stuff out." And that was my inauspicious start to sort of all things marketing. I had really no marketing background at all. I mean, I've been marketed to my whole life, but never really thought about, what it takes to run a marketing department, and have been doing it sort of ever since.
Trial by fire,
Yes.
as we like to say. We all kind of fall into it, do you find now, Sarah, that you might have a little bit more empathy and understanding to the sales folks on your team?
Oh,
Totally. More relatable?
Oh yeah. And I talk about like how bad I was at being a BDR. And I talk about like how, they're so much better than me at the closing motion. Like I actually, at one point in my career, I had a marketing team that, like, especially on the demand gen side, they really didn't understand how difficult being a BDR was. And I made them do like days of BDR work because they'd never had that career experience, and they didn't really have a great sort of understanding of what the job was, why it was so difficult, why it can be so hard for people to just be like rude to you and hang up on you. And I
Thick
mean,
skin, right?
yeah, it takes a
Right.
lot to be a good business development rep. And so I am a big believer in like, hey, job shadow. Like if you don't come and you don't naturally understand why that job's really hard, let's do some job shadowing. Like let's make sure that, we're doing a day in the life. Let's make some cold calls and see what happens, because I promise you, you think it's going to be this thing that's like, oh yeah, whatever, it's easy, it's repetitive, but it's really not.
And if you think about it, I mean, listen, you're a seasoned marketer. Sales and marketing go hand in hand. I mean, they're kissing cousins, right? For the most part. So I think it's critical, especially as a BDR, to have a deep, obviously institutional knowledge of the product and the service and everything. So it's even more critical that they're shadowing and doing the day in the life and really understanding. But I want to go back to the early days in your career. Sarah, what was one of those tough lessons that you learned the hard way? The first time you kind of got like, as we like to say, punched in the face in the industry, metaphorically speaking.
Oh boy. I went from working in this 10-person startup to working at Kronos before they merged with Ultimate Software to become UKG. Kronos was a $1 billion business when I worked
Mm-hmm.
there, thousands of employees. And I can remember, I interviewed and I was, joining the team, and I can remember like the first time I sat down with someone who now I consider a really good friend. And she was talking to me about like the work that she needed me to do. And like, this is so small, but like she was using the like filtering in Excel, and like she made a pivot table, and she was like, da, 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 off you go.
Magic, dark arts.
Yeah. And I was like,
For everyone
can you
just
do
listening
that
at
to me one
home,
more time?
Sarah made a face of complete shock, awe,
Yeah.
amazement, all the faces.
Yeah. Like, yeah. I often forget that this is not always just a visual and
Well,
audio
that's what
medium.
I'm here for. I'm here for the assists.
Yeah,
It's
let me narrate what my face looks like right now. I look scared. Um,
it's also for
it was
accessibility for people that can't watch. We want to make sure
Yeah,
that they could.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. It's important. It's inclusive. So I can remember that like even just from day one, moving from a small company to a big company and understanding what marketing took, at an ed tech company that, did a couple $1 million of revenue into an HR tech company that was doing, $1 billion of revenue. I mean, it was like I'm sort of making a joke about like even just a simple function in Excel, but it was like that on steroids. I mean,
Hmm.
having to learn everything from, like how to write a creative brief. I remember my first creative brief was terrible. The head of creative like sat me down and was like, this is not going to work. Like, and here's all the reasons, and, here's what messaging is and all this stuff. I think everything was it was a great learning experience because they have a dynamite marketing machine over there. I give them a lot of credit. And the team that I was embedded with was fantastic. I still keep in touch with many of those folks. I am so grateful that I had that experience moving from a small company to a big company, because I've done that jump backwards and forwards a couple of times in my career. It's a very hard move sometimes to make,
Right.
but it gives you a really good framework to say like, what can I learn from big company stuff that I can like translate and make more like digestible for a small company? Or what can I take from like the agility of a small company and use it to push the boundaries in a big company where everything's kind of like the same, or just, eke out like 0.01%, better performance kind of a thing. So really, really big learnings.
And if you don't mind getting personal, because we are going to get personal on this podcast as much as you're open to, going back to those early days, was it hard for you with how and what you identify to be in these organizations? And maybe some people were scared, or they didn't know, or they had their biases. How did you deal with that early on in your career? Maybe change hearts and minds and thoughts.
Yeah. So one thing to sort of maybe like share about myself is that I'm very proudly, openly queer and non-binary and trans and disabled now. But for a very long time in my career, I hid who I was. And I hid who I was exactly because of some of the societal pressures I think that you're sort of alluding to. I was really worried that being who I was going to distract, in air quotes and danger quotes, people from like what I was saying, my thoughts about, marketing or my professional qualifications, my overall professional development. I am the things I can't hide, I'm loud, I'm outspoken, I'm very opinionated. Strong opinions may be weakly held, but definitely strong opinions coming out the bat. And, for those who can't see me in the visual medium, I've always looked a little alternative. I have some sort of like, physical markers of like being a queer person in America. And I never really hid like being queer. It wasn't something that I tried to hide. And it wasn't something, I've worked for a long time in the Boston area. It was never something I needed to hide. But I hid my not being non-binary and I hid my pronouns for a very long time. And when I would get closer to people, my teams at work, my direct reports, my boss, people I worked with closely, I would tell them, especially later in my journey, I would say, hey, I know that I often participate in these spaces that are, for women, or, I talk a lot about pay equity, which is often boiled down to sort of a binary definition of gender, right? I'm non-binary, which is, a different thing. And actually in my personal life, I use they, them pronouns. And it would be great if you too could use they, them pronouns for me. And for a very long time, I had in my email signature, like Sarah, they/she, right?
It's right there
and
if anyone looking. Yep.
Yeah. Now it says they, them, right? But for a long time, I sort of like didn't make a big deal out of it. I didn't draw attention to it. Again, I really thought that it would distract people. And what I learned from that experience, and what I learned from a tremendously challenging experience with someone who said that they would not respect my identity when I came out to them, was that ultimately you can't really like separate your identity and your like the content of your character from all those things that you want professional recognition and acceptance, and furthering your career around, right? It's impossible for me to be the best version of my chosen self at work all day, every day, if I'm spending so much of my like time and
Suppressing
energy.
any of it.
Yeah. And like
Yeah.
cognitive load, like the cognitive load of having to remember, like, who am I out to? And who's practicing my pronouns, and what can I say? And what can I tell you about like my life at home and, my friends, and, who am I in this group and who am I in this other group? I mean, it's this concept called like masking, right? Or covering. And it creates this tremendous cognitive load. And then you're spending all that brain power thinking about that stuff versus thinking about like, okay, how do I, be a great marketer? How do I think about,
How do I do my job?
how do I do my job? How do I live my life? How do I be the best friend that I can be? How do I be the best colleague that I can be? How do I be the best parent that I can be? How do I be the best anything that I can be?
And it's so tough. Like I truly consider myself an ally, but as what am I called? A cis straight male, right? Right. Like
If you want to be, you can be
I mean,
anything.
I have to be whatever I want. I'm also a unicorn. Believe me, I talk a lot about biases, and more importantly, in our world of HR, human resources, talent, of unconscious biases. And I truly believe, Sarah, that we all have unconscious biases by effect of how we're raised. And it doesn't mean that we're inherently racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever you are. It's just kind of the way you grow up. And I learned not so long ago that the easiest and most effective way is to be self-aware of your biases. Right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. No one is 100%. No one. And I don't think like no one is 100% not anything. We all have things in our mind, one thing or another that we feel a certain way for, and that forms unconscious biases. But and I applaud you for finding a way to approach people who may be scared. Maybe they don't know. Maybe they don't know how to approach someone with your background. And the right way to do it is, how do you educate them? How do you do it in an empathetic and caring way where you're not making it confrontational? And how do you do that in the workplace? What are some of those best practices that you found?
I have learned that I am often the first openly non-binary or trans person that people have met. And oftentimes that means that they do have a lot of questions and they don't necessarily have an outlet for them because they're afraid, that they're going to ask the wrong thing. They're going to say the wrong thing.
Offend somebody.
Right. And they don't necessarily know. I mean, there's tons of resources online, but like
not Reddit or Google.
Yeah. Right. But maybe they don't know, where to find that information. And so they come to the table with a lot of, like what I would consider sort of like basic questions, but I think they're fundamentally good to engage, with and on, because if I am the first person you've ever met who identifies the way that I do, let's take the opportunity to have a great conversation about it. So I know there's a big split, like the LGBTQIA plus community, like many marginalized communities, is not a monolith. Some people really do not want to have to take on the emotional labor of like being your Google for what a non-binary
you figure it out.
person
I'm going to
is,
be
right?
who I am. You figure it out.
Yeah. Like that's not my problem. That's your problem. I take maybe the opposite approach, just because of my own personal experience. I never judge, which way people go on this, but I take the opposite approach. I want to engage you. If you want to ask me, anything from what is a pronoun? What are my pronouns? What are your pronouns? How do you figure that out? What do you mean there's options, right? Like what are alternative pronouns? Like how do you conjugate the sentence? Do I say they is, they are?
That's a fair question. And how does it work in different languages too?
Yeah. How does it work in different languages, right? Like I do a lot of like
Nosotros, usotros.
yeah. Do a lot of like educational outreach and stuff like that for folks who have questions. And then, my big thing is like language. So I did this degree in dead languages, right? And part of what you learn is about like the anthropology of languages and about language acquisition, how language changes over time. Language is about repetition. So I also know that, it's not that natural for those of us who are raised in this binary gender world for you to suddenly start referring to a single person as they, right? You're unpacking.
You're not trained for that. The mind, body, mouth are not trained. So you have to
and it
practice
doesn't matter if I tell you the singular they in English is older than the singular you. Like the reality is that, the singular you and the he, she binary has become, very like sort of standard in modern language. So what I say is, hey, you got to practice, right? And so I think maybe the one thing I do that is controversial is that if somebody gets it wrong, I do correct them. And, some people give feedback like, that makes me uncomfortable in the moment. And I say, well, it makes me uncomfortable that you got it wrong. This is not like a competition. If I have to be uncomfortable,
we're not keeping score.
Yeah. If I have to be uncomfortable though, you have to be uncomfortable, because if you apply like a different, not a pronoun, but if you apply someone's name to that situation and, I met you and you said, hey, my name's Adam. And I said, you look like a Brandon to me. And I think if we're really being honest with each other, Adam, your parents probably assigned you Brandon at birth, and I'm going to call you Brandon. And it doesn't matter how many times you say Adam, I'm going to say Brandon. Like that sounds,
skin that.
Right. That sounds out of control.
It's a reframe to also
that would
de-escalate a little bit.
That would never work. So I think, for me, it's just about like language is about practice, right? And the more you practice, the more natural it becomes. So my friends and family, if you're really close to me, we've made it a game. Americans love gamification. So if you get it wrong, you owe me a proverbial dollar or a compliment. And it's funny to see that, like, sometimes even on my team meetings, like I'm not actually charging my team money. I want to put like a big disclaimer on this.
Right.
But on my team meetings, if somebody says the wrong pronouns, or if they say something like, hey guys, as opposed to like, hey everybody, or hey folks, or, hey team, right? If they use a gendered word, like we will be like, you owe me $1 to the marketing fund.
But that's the one I always deeply respect when somebody advises me on their pronouns. I really expect, not just on a podcast, but in public as well too. But the one that always gets me, I always say, hey guys, regardless. It's just like an ever all catching kind of thing. So I would have to relearn, hey everybody.
Yeah. And
so I don't offend.
And you just, you don't have to say everybody. Like, I think the main thing is pick like one word that works with your style. I say folks or friends.
Oh, I say folks all the time. I sound like an old person.
Yeah, but I think it's funny that I sound that way.
Hey, folks.
Hey, folks, right?
If folks like Rod, yeah.
if you're from the American
Bugs
South,
Bunny.
hey y'all. If you're from Pittsburgh, hey yins. Like,
yins.
Yeah, like team, everybody, people. There's loads I think that you can swap in there. And
was it a hard? Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you.
No, go
was
ahead.
it a harder conversation? Was it harder to have this conversation with senior leadership or your bosses? I did air quotes there, not dangerous air quotes. Was that a harder conversation to approach? Did you feel like maybe I affect something, the way they think about me professionally, like early on in your career? Like, was that a tough one for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it makes you, like, when you go to approach the conversation, coming out in general, if you've never had the experience, feels like your stomach is going to fall out of your butt. Like, is the best
fun.
Yeah, it's the best like way I can describe like the pit in your stomach when you're like, I'm going to tell this person, I have no control over how they react. It could be a complete non-issue. It could be the end of my career advancement. It could be anything. It could be a threat to my physical or emotional safety.
You have no idea.
You have no idea. I would say, I mean, in general, it's been more nerve-wracking. I give a lot of credit though to leaders. I think that, a lot of folks, it hasn't necessarily mattered the level of the organization that you have been at. It's mattered more about how you approach the conversation. One of my worst coming out experiences actually inspired me to fully transition at work. I had a new boss. I told him about my pronouns. I told him about my identity, and he laughed at me. And he said, I don't view the world that way. I'm not going to do that. You're going to be Sarah, she, her. And, that's it. Right. One of my best experiences, telling someone who was like my matrixed boss. And he said, great, let's, how do I put pronouns on my email signature? How do I put pronouns in my LinkedIn bio? How do I on our next all hands talk about what you taught me and, introduce it to the team and invite them to share? Like, how do I, help support you? Do I correct people when they get it wrong when you're not in the room? So I don't know if it's about like the level as much as like how much you, the person, are like willing to put that allyship forward.
Like I truly believe that everyone's entitled to think whatever the hell they want in this world, right? But it's how you, and to a degree, like right, like for the most part, right? Like you could decide how you want to feel, but how you interact with somebody who feels differently, you have to have a common ground. So you're respectful of who they represent themselves as.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of my take on it, right? Like don't be an asshole. Right? Especially in the workplace, right? Like we're all trying to work together and be collaborative. So you talk a lot about inclusive leadership. Like how do you build a team that's inclusive? Like it's kind of like, I hate to say it's a buzzword, but it has been the last few years. But how do you act on it? Right? It's one thing to say something for the sake of saying it, and it's another thing to actually act on what you're saying you're going to do.
Yeah. I think if you break down like the, diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and there's a lot of discussion
let's get into it.
About that acronym, right? Like,
especially these days in the political climate. Geez.
Yeah. A lot of leaders, are sort of like asked to participate in conversations about the diversity, right? Like you might have seen things in some parts of your career about, hiring profile, hiring quotas, diverse candidates in the hiring process. It comes up a lot in recruiting spaces. Whether or not you agree with those types of techniques or whether they're still legal at time of this podcast reporting, like is a whole different animal, right? But I think that's something that, people are like, well, diversity is really good and diverse teams perform better. You've probably seen, big corporate talking points about it, right? But what I think really performs better is inclusive teams. And inclusive teams realize that, diverse teams, they're really great. They truly are innovative. I truly believe that, right? I truly believe
there's metrics to show, but there's metrics to show.
Yeah, there's metrics, right? And they're harder to gel. And there's more emphasis that you have to put on making sure that the environment is inclusive so that when you have experts from all these different walks of life, when you have experts from all these different personal backgrounds or even professional backgrounds, right? When you got 5 experts and they all stack up to solve the same problem, you get 5 different ways of solving the problem. That's the innovative. But what you have to work harder at is making sure everybody feels confident enough to share their answer. And then also making sure that you figure out how are you going to build consensus? Because now I've got 5 strong independent marketers with 5 really good answers to this question. Demand gen's got an answer, brand's got an answer, product marketing's got an answer, marketing ops has got an answer, partner marketing's got an answer. Never mind the personal identities of all those people and how they bring them to the table, right? How do I figure out which of those or what combination of those is actually going to be the thing that we make the strategy, execute the program against? And how do I manage, the process of getting to the answer and also making sure that people don't feel discouraged from sharing their ideas on the next thing.
Heavy as a crown, Sarah. Heavy as a crown.
Yeah. I don't think there's any, listen, inclusivity is a journey. It's not a destination. I don't think there's any perfect person who's running a perfectly inclusive team, myself included. I don't think I'm perfect at this, but I genuinely believe in the work. And I believe that when you are working towards things, that's just one example of how to make people feel included, right? Like never mind sort of the identity stuff, right? If you're creating that sense of inclusion, if you're pushing beyond the diversity question to actually address things like equity, inclusion, and ultimately belonging, like, do I belong in this organization? That's when you're doing the work.
The B always gets left off.
Totally.
I want to double back on something for a minute. One of my kind of talking points when it comes to DEI and B, specifically around the D diversity, I'm a huge proponent of diversity of mindset. You were kind of alluding to it before. Regardless of how you identify, mindset, because you don't want a company full of yes people. That's not what you want.
Or clones of yourself.
Yes,
or of leadership.
Yes, aligned on core good human values, But you want people with different perspectives, different worldviews, as long as they're positive, right? Like that's kind of what we're thinking about there. But because then to your point also, when you talk about like, if you're pulling consensus from different teams there, someone has a different perspective on something. Where are they coming from? What are their life experiences? Because that's the good stuff, right? Like that's the grit that's
Yeah.
gonna really, really, really define that. And it's just fascinating. We could spend hours talking about this, but I want to shift gears a little bit. I want to talk a little bit more about HiBob. For any of the folks out there, high level overview. What is HiBob?
HiBob is an HR tech company. We offer a platform, Bob. It's a full suite HCM solution for what we call the 3 club of companies. Modern, meaning you really care about your people first, you're people centric. Mid-size, you can be anywhere from 100 to 10,000 employees. And multinational or maybe multi-site. People who operate across like many different geographies or many different sites, they have really unique HR challenges. HiBob was built as a global company by birth. Bob, our platform, was built to be a global HR solution by birth. So for everybody who wants to deliver that really like seamless, modern, global employee experience, HiBob, or Bob, rather, our platform is a great solution.
Is Bob an acronym or is Bob a name?
Bob is a name, and Bob doesn't have pronouns.
That was my follow-up question. Thank you for stealing my thunder. Bob is just Bob.
Bob is Bob. Yep.
Bob doesn't identify. Bob is just Bob.
Bob is just Bob.
Bob's cool.
Yeah, I think so.
Bob's
we use it every day.
and we were talking about before our good friend Claude Silver over at VaynerMedia. I was excited to see that they use HiBob. I was like, they're an innovative company. They know what it's all about there.
Yeah.
What was the hardest part for you stepping into the CMM role at HiBob? What was that first challenge that you had to take on?
I think there's a couple. I mean, HiBob's a hyper growth company, so we grow a lot really, really fast year over year. And when I joined HiBob, I think we were about, I don't know, maybe 500 or 600 employees. We're now at 1,100. That's under 2 years later.
It's hyper growth.
Yeah. So, we're growing really fast in revenue. We're growing fast in customers. We're growing fast in our targets. We're growing, our financial performance is growing really fast, right? But a scale up environment is like fundamentally different than a startup, and it's fundamentally different than a big company because you're in that sort of like awkward growing phase where all the stuff that you've duct taped together to get this far in your agile startup motion starts maybe to fall apart, and you got to build process for scale and stuff like that. I think it's a really challenging thing to do, build the airplane while you're flying it, for lack of a better metaphor. But it's definitely a really exciting thing to do as well, especially when you're a marketer and you like, trying new things and fixing stuff and, sinking your teeth into problems.
Hey everybody, I want to talk about a product and platform that I absolutely love, and our latest sponsor, Interseller, the prospecting and outreach platform of choice for recruiters and sellers. Whether you're doubling down on business development or recruiting talent, Interseller does all the heavy lifting of finding contact data, automating the email and follow-up process, and syncs all that rich data into 20 plus CRM and ATS platforms. Reach out now and get going on a 2-week free trial and let them know you heard about it from Adam on the podcast today. Check out the link on the website. Appreciate it.
It's a highly competitive space. And we were talking before, this is a world that I live in. I'm deeply embedded into the HR and TA tech space. But what makes HiBob stand out, though, in this noise out there of innovation and product differentiation and marketing mix? Like, how does HiBob, stay at the top of consideration?
I give credit maybe to 3 things that really differentiate us at HiBob. One is, of course, the product. Gotta talk about the product in a SaaS company.
SaaS.
We have a really innovative product. We offer a full suite solution. It is very modern. Some folks like to joke it's Instagram on the front end and Workday on the back end. So it's consumerization of technology. It's friendly technology. It's HR tech that employees actually like to use want to use as opposed to like resent having to use.
I got to log on to this to do that. No way. I don't want to do that.
Like when I say I use it every day, I mean, I really mean it. Like, and 95% of people who actually have a login to HiBob use it actively, which is an incredible statistic. So product, of course, customers and our customer community, a genuine joy of my job as CMO is that our customers love Bob and they love us. They will go on LinkedIn and they will post videos of, welcoming a new employee, Bob, to their company and onboarding and throwing them a party, right? I've never enjoyed that as a CMO. I've worked at many HR tech companies where, for better or worse, your customers, like, they sort of have to use you.
They just use it, or it's a legacy platform.
Yeah. And they tolerate you. But that's maybe like the best descriptor of the
I don't tolerate Bob. Bob's my friend.
Yeah, Bob's my friend, right?
I wanna hang out,
Exactly.
Bob.
And then I think the brand looks really different than anything else that's out there. And, again, as CMO, a genuine joy of my job is that I have this brand that brings this like fun, inclusive expression to life for Bob, for our website, for our marketing materials, for our representation of, Bob in the market. We have great stuff to say. We have great means of saying it. We have a great, visual identity, a great, like style guide. We have a really strong sense of who we are. And, as somebody who has a very strong personal sense of who they are, I really respect that.
Well, I was about to say, like, they made it easy, but now, Sarah, how do you take that and bottle it up and keep that flame alive? How do you keep that going? I mean, that's your charge as a CMO.
Yeah.
And how do you not just keep it going, Sarah, but how do you innovate?
Yeah.
How do you keep the ball moving forward?
Yeah. I think it's about tapping into what you're good at. So, we really want to invest in our customer community and even open it up, broader to the world, looking out to the coming year to be able to make sure that folks who are interested in becoming a modern people first company, that they have the resources they need to know what good looks like, know how to get there, know what the benchmarks are, have a community of folks who are just like them and just like Claude and you and all these great people, right, who are on the same mission, especially at a time in our society when like so much of the conversation about HR and so much of the conversation about DEIB and some of these big topics is so negative and there's so much pressure coming from the outside. I have met, the thing I love about HR tech is working with HR people. I've met some genuinely wonderful HR people, modern HR people, forward thinking HR people. They want to prioritize protecting and nurturing their top talent, regardless of who they are, regardless of, how they identify, where they come from, right? We want to give them a community. We want to give them a brand. We want to give them a voice in, pushing back maybe against some of this like really horrible rhetoric that's happening all around us to say, actually, no, if you, want to attract and retain top talent, well, guess what? Talent is equally distributed in our world, even if opportunity is not.
And I'm going to go on my soapbox for a minute here. I could not agree with you more. I walk the floors like you of all these big trade shows, and I see these legacy companies that are doing the same thing. And I'm no spring chicken. I'm a Gen Xer. I'm right on the border of that. And I'm like, these companies need to talk to the future decision makers, those mid-level managers that are going to be the directors, that are going to be the head of talent, the CHROs, the head of people. Those are going to be your customers. So if your product and the tech is not speaking to them and their needs right now, you're done in a few years.
Mm-hmm.
You're done. If you're not speaking their love language, if you're not speaking the right way to talk to them, and that's what I love. Like when I play around with HiBob and just from the outside of it, that's how you talk to these customers because that's who they are outside of work.
Yeah.
That's how they want to engage. That's how they want to engage inside of work. That's how they want to be spoken to and engage with. And if you're not capturing that, that's it's just you're missing the ball on that. So again, going back to how do you stay motivated and how do you keep the team motivated with that mission?
I think part of it is like the excitement of getting to do something different every single day. Like I've worked in big companies where the job was a lot more sort of, the same and carefully paced. I think marketers come in different sort of like models, people, there's the 0 to 1. I want to build it from scratch. There's the, fix it, break it, put it back together, tinkerer. I want to make big bets. I want to try new things. I never want it to be the same 2 days in a row. And there's also the people who love like the optimization, like the eking out of 1% better every single, like they love that like puzzle piecing. I probably fall in that middle category. So, I kind of like the opportunity of like the chaos a little bit of growth. I think a lot of my team would probably tell you that they fall into that same sort of mode. Like, we've worked in different companies, smaller, bigger, more money, less money, different drivers, different, maybe even different like parts of the tech ecosystem or, B2C instead of B2B. And I think we gravitate to sort of like that it's a different challenge and it's always like a unique challenge day over day. I wouldn't, I'd be lying to you if I said that it was like perfect. And it's,
of course,
when everything changes all the time, it can be hard to know, where's my North Star and, what are we
you don't want
aiming at?
uncertainty.
Yeah. So I think, if I have to think about like, what am I working on? It's like, okay, let's make sure the strategy is clear. Let's make sure that, we all know where we're headed. Let's make sure that like we all think about how change is like a normal part of business as opposed to like building some resilience to change, stuff like that.
Well, you need diversity built in too to
Yeah.
grow a team. You can't just have everything can't be amazing every single. Well, let me ask you this: as much as you're open to sharing, what was that last project or initiative that came to life that completely landed flat, that completely failed? You and the team had a hypothesis. You went out, you tried something, you built something, and it just fell flat. Let's have a little marketing class here.
Ooh.
I didn't say it was gonna be easy.
No, I know.
I don't do an easy podcast here. What fun is that? Right? Jeez, that'd be boring. No one's gonna listen if we do that. People want the good stuff, Sarah.
Yeah, right. Things that haven't worked. It's funny. I keep a mental catalog of the things I was wrong about, like the thing I thought was not going to work and then did, but I tend to flesh out the things that didn't work faster, probably out of my mental catalog. Things that have not worked. I guess one thing I would say is like, you can do the best marketing in the world, but if you're not enabling sales, it doesn't matter. So I think things that haven't worked like in recent memory, we're building a lot of like that sales and marketing alignment motion at HiBob. And so my marketing team, you can like the website's like a living laboratory, right? You can change a
it's a
lot
petri
of stuff
dish.
on the website like this, and you can test and you can A/B test and you can flip and you can change the CTA and you can, deliver a completely different, form experience and all this stuff. And I think that like one thing that we learned very like the hard way didn't work is like just because you can make all those changes in real time, like when you were a startup,
Mhm.
doesn't mean that the people who are actually following up to our conversation about business development earlier, the people who are actually following up on those leads and chasing those folks, if you don't enable them with the information that they need to be successful and to actually have a conversation coming off of whatever that great experience was that you delivered, then it doesn't matter, and it falls flat internally, like the handoff is broken.
Mm.
And also it falls flat for the customer because they had this, experience of one thing on the front end, and then the disconnection of the follow-up is like a whiplash, right?
Mm.
So I think, one thing that we
Mm.
learned is like, don't push stuff live on the web just because you can, just because you have a cool idea to test, if you're not willing to do the work of actually, sitting down with the folks on the other side, with business development, with sales enablement to say, this is what we're testing. This is what it looks like. This is how to have a conversation if somebody comes in off of it. This is, how to follow up. This is, all the
Of course.
legwork.
Of course. So let's talk about the biggest buzzword in the room aside from DIB is another acronym, AI. It's a little alpha here. What kind of fun, cool stuff are you guys working on from a product innovation standpoint? Maybe the way you're utilizing it in marketing, market research. How are you and the team utilizing AI? And let's lift up the hood and talk shop a little bit.
Yeah. Actually, it's funny. AI, some of our early pilots with AI is another great example of like something that, you want to work and doesn't work. I'm not like the biggest AI junkie myself. I find a lot of it to be like kind of gimmicky. So this was one that I was like, I don't know if that's going to work, and it ended up not working. My favorite target of this is of course the ever-present chatbot on websites. So chatbots.
My favorite are the shopping site ones where you go through it for 5 minutes and they don't. I just want to return or exchange this.
Yes, I just human being.
Tell me how to exchange this. I don't want to return it. I want to exchange it.
Yeah. Yep. We've played around with chatbots and stuff like that. I think the most surprising thing to my team was the very low engagement rate. Actually, like people, they want to navigate the website in the traditional way. We are not yet at the place where like a fully, you could just have like an agent that would replace like your website, your web experience, your product experience, any of that stuff. Like it's great to have those.
Depends
like,
on the industry and vertical. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's great to have that opportunity for somebody who would like to engage with it on a natural language, sort of like processing, whatever. But for the most part, people still click around the website. They still follow the crosslink. They don't necessarily.
They go to the bottom for careers and find out more and contact us. We all know how that works.
User experience has not actually, fundamentally revolutionized just because you can throw a chatbot on your website. So I think one thing we're playing around with is like, okay, so if there's super low engagement with something like that, how do we use the same technology and asking questions, helping people get what they need at maybe a different part of the buying cycle when somebody is more ready to engage with a question and sort of answer, a question and response or navigation type format? Is that something that, is better suited to in product applications versus marketing applications? Is that something that's better suited like once you filled out a form and
Customer care versus
yeah.
different.
Or like, hey, you filled out a form and you've requested something of me. You want pricing. Can I ask you 3 questions so that when you do get on the phone with somebody, the experience is much more tailored to, who you are and what you need?
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit about you and maybe I can navigate you so you don't even need to talk to a person? I think, some of that stuff where the sort of like the point in time in the customer journey matters so much
Of course.
is one of the like
And
really interesting sort of like thought process applications of like, where does AI really fit in the way that buyers actually engage with it today versus all this great talk that we're doing in the industry about how like, you're never going to have a UI again and it's all going to be like a command line of, chat
Again,
GPT, whatever.
right. I played around with HR and TA tools right now that, and especially for high volume hiring that are taking folk, especially seasonal workers, that take them all the way up to offer,
Yep.
W-2 validation, identity validation, all the kind of back end stuff, all the way up to the offer stage. Cause there really isn't much, there's a very small margin for negotiating at that point. And it really kind of just depends on the threshold. But again, going back to your ethos of listening, learning, evolving, that's really key in this space. What's keeping you up at night these days in this space?
I think it is probably like the really complicated, really like really heavily saturated market that we, are in. I think that's something that definitely like, standing out and being different. You talked about like, how do you evolve the brand?
Mm.
How do you evolve the product? How do you evolve, your relationship with your customer? How do you stay true to who you are, but always keep pushing the envelope? I think that that's something that in a very, very crowded market is, always something that's going to keep you up at night. I mean, I could talk your ear off about like, I think that the use of AI content and all this stuff is making the internet unusable to humans.
We're almost
We
at
could go
bot
down
versus
a
bot.
total, we could go down a total rabbit hole here about like the things that I worry about.
You're gonna trigger me.
Societally.
I may see some offensive things, not about you, but about
I'm worried that like, what is Google doing with their search business if the AI result that they're giving is completely like, unrelated and it's, knocking off like search results that actually are related.
Yeah.
Like some of that stuff occasionally I wake up in the sweat, like, oh my God,
bots are coming.
Yeah.
They're here.
But I think for the most part, I mean, to me, some of that stuff is like a really interesting opportunity rather than something that's scary. And I think it's like the more fundamental marketing questions, messaging, positioning, differentiation in a crowded space. How do we keep that vibe that HiBob is known for alive as we grow? And how do we keep our culture that we're known for, internally alive and thriving as we grow?
That's the hardest part.
Yeah.
I mean, you're a steward of culture within the organization too, of who you are, how you carry yourself personally, professionally, and the teams that you build. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, because I have this opportunity. We're going to share some secrets here for anybody who's interviewing with Sarah. So I assume when in the interview process, and I don't like to assume, but I'm gonna, by the time someone gets to you in the process, Sarah, that they already have on paper skills level, they're already becoming vetted for the job that they are applying for. Now, when they come to meet you, you're vetting them for
vibe check.
I was about to say vibe, because I despise, if you've ever heard me speak, I despise the F word, which is fit. I despise culture fit. It's literally my least.
Culture add. Not culture fit. It's not about fitting in. It's about adding.
No, thank you. Preach. So vibe check. How do you vibe check to ensure also that you're also parking some of your biases or maybe some preconceived notions? What's your vibe check questions?
Ooh.
I said alpha here. We're going to share some secrets.
Yeah.
That's how we get people to listen. That's my clickbait. That's my clickbait.
I think it depends
Sarah Reynolds shares their secrets.
Yeah, right. It depends on the level of the candidate. A lot of the folks that I talk to, especially in that capacity, are senior leaders that we're hiring into the organization. I'm talking, VP level, tenured leaders, not just in marketing, across functions. Oftentimes, folks are smart enough to Google me. So I don't think this question would come as a big surprise. And it usually doesn't come as a surprise to leaders that I interview. But I often ask them, like, what have you done in your role to move a concept like DEI and B in your organization forward? And I think it's really telling sometimes, some people talk about like work that the organization has done,
But what did you do?
yeah, but they're really nebulous on like, what did I do? Some people don't know how to answer the question at all, which I'm always fascinated by, especially because you're interviewing at an HR technology company, and hopefully you did Google me before we sat down.
A little bit of curiosity. Yeah.
But I think the best answers are really personal. Some people talk about their team. Some people talk about like navigating conflict. Some people talk about like hiring processes that they've put in place. Some people talk about like the places where like their strategy and the corporate strategy maybe diverge. Some people talk about like a lesson that they learned from, somebody that they met. Some people talk about like, they have kids at home and this conversation came up at the dinner table and their kid made them think about how they were treating, folks at work by, interfacing in a certain way or asking a certain question, right? That is usually something that gets people like thinking and talking in a more sort of like connected way. It tells you a lot about somebody's leadership if they're able to sort of like articulate a great answer to that question. I think it also tells you a lot about their like prep for, how much do you know the HR tech industry? How much do you know HiBob? How much do you know, our company, our culture, what we value? Because even if you didn't Google me, if you spend 2 seconds Googling HiBob, you're going to know that that's something that you're probably going to get asked.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you as a recruiter, one of my biggest turnoffs is when a candidate does not do their research. And I'm talking basic surface level, 5 minutes in the bathroom reading, folks. Like, look at the website. Like, dig in a little bit. Be inquisitive. Come up with a couple of questions on your own. Show me that thought process. Right?
Yeah,
show me
that's
that
the
you're not
other
a robot.
thing. That's my real vibe check.
Yeah.
Like my real vibe check is to say you've talked to a lot of people before me. You've probably been asked tons of questions about your skills and competencies, and you've probably learned a lot about HiBob and about our team. What questions do you have for me? Because the minute that you don't have any questions,
no, that's the bit.
See ya.
So what's one of the craziest questions someone ever asked you in an interview?
Somebody once asked me if I was gonna if like my goal was to make everybody non-binary.
Okay, then. Alrighty,
Yeah,
then.
that wasn't a great day. I've been asked several times when I say, like, I say by means of introduction, my name is Sarah. My pronouns are they and them. I'm chief marketing officer at HiBob. I give a little spiel about, who I am or who the company is, whatever. I've been asked several times, are you serious? Like with the pronouns thing? Again, just, I'm not sure about your fit for HR technology. If that's like, just as an industry, like, never mind.
We're inclusive. That's
Yeah.
kind of what we do here.
Yeah, like our cultures, like we live our cultural values out loud. Like I can tell you that all the stuff that you see about HiBob and about our culture and about that actually is the reality on the inside. So not coming to the table with those types of things or coming to the table like
It's a deal breaker.
combative on some of those things is always an interesting move for me. But yeah, I mean I've been asked some. Unfortunately,
some doozies.
Yeah, I've been asked some pretty wild stuff.
Wild stuff. Are you a Boston sports fan?
Not really. I grew up in a family that's half English and half Kiwi, so I can tell you a lot about All Blacks rugby and not a lot about the New England Patriots.
All right, so we're gonna skip on that one question that I had there. But let's bring it home here. I love talking to accomplished seasoned leaders like yourself, and I put a little spin on the classic question. Tell me your best piece of advice. Sarah, what's that greatest piece of advice that you received that you take action on daily? A mantra, a motto, something that you live and breathe and you put into action every day of your life.
I had an old boss quote what I later found out was Ron Swanson to me. Don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing. That is something that plays on repeat in my brain, especially it's annual planning season, right? You're seeing these great lists of all these initiatives and projects and OKRs and all this stuff, right? From your team. And I don't know about you, but I have a team of like 80 people. So I got a lot of smart, driven, creative marketers, pitching, this is what we should do next year. And you come to the table and you're like, right, team, let's centralize all this stuff. And you get this like, laundry list. It's like Santa's workshop. You're like unfolding a scroll. Yeah. It's like the receipt at CVS. It's printing.
They've shortened those, by the way, folks. They've done a little bit of listening. Yeah.
Yeah. It's printing for eons, right? And I think a lot to myself, like, we're doing too many things. So how do we combine? How do we set aside? How do we whole ass more, really great, really meaningful, big bets that are going to move the needle? Again, I'm going to scale up, right? Like, it's not 1% better. I got to get it 10%, 100% better, right? Year over year. What am I going to do that's going to fundamentally change the game versus I'm going to do a lot of little stuff, or, I have this big laundry list that I'm going to, I don't really have the, resources, capacity, brain space, et cetera, to be able to kind of do all this stuff. And it'll end up in a worse place if I don't cut it down.
I love it. And last but not least, you've had an incredibly successful career and only going up from here. And I truly applaud you for being a true champion in so many different areas and really making a difference in our industry and keeping the train on the tracks and doing the right thing for the right people for the right reasons and rising above the noise, the political climate, the hate that's out there, the garbage, the naysayers. So kudos to you. Thank you so much for everything that you do internally, externally, out in this world. So I'll leave it with this question, Sarah. How do you, Sarah Reynolds, define success?
Well, first of all, thank you. It's a great honor to get to do this work. Every great experience that I have where I get off stage and somebody comes up to me and says, I've never seen somebody on stage who looks and sounds like me, or, hey, my kid is trans and I never thought a path in tech was open to them until I met you. All of those people make all the horrible stuff, including the death threats that I get on social media, totally worth it. So Thank you for seeing me, and thank you for recognizing that. Success to me is about finding your groove. Like, it's about finding your fit. It's about finding like your best chosen self. And it's about finding the thing that makes you, to some of the things that we've been talking about, like to kind of put a bow on this conversation. Whether you're thinking about the brand aspect of it, like what makes my brand, my product, my offering different. Success is about really nailing why someone should buy your thing as opposed to any of the other substitute goods that they could go out there and buy. Or on your personal life, like, success to me is about living authentically in a way that, yes, of course, keeps me physically safe and emotionally safe and, allows me to be financially successful, but ultimately also allows me to sleep at night and know that, like, I'm doing the best that I can. And I think that, it might be a non-traditional definition of what success looks like, but I think in this, crazy world that we all live in, like, I think we need a little bit of that, like, humanity in success, because a lot of the time we default to, like, it's numbers, it's hitting my target, it's being paid my bonus, it's, whatever. But to me, I don't know, it just feels a little different.
That's why I love asking that question, because it's a diversity of answers that I get from that. So Sarah Reynolds, I want to thank you so much for joining me and my audience today on the podcast. You can find out more at HiBob.com. We'll link it up in the show notes. You can connect with Sarah on LinkedIn. Anywhere else? Did I miss anything? Anywhere else where folks could connect with you and find out more? So I said folks, and
you did say folks.
I say naturally.
I'm tweeting into the void as the ship goes down on the artist formerly known as Twitter at Fair Pay Monster. Although I might go find some new social homes as we continue to go down that path.
Have you messed around with Blue Sky?
I have messed around a little bit with Blue Sky. I got to figure out if that's going to be my new home for my, sort of community. I like the irreverence of Twitter as opposed to, LinkedIn and stuff like that. To your point about, like, make tech for the buyers of the future, the conversation doesn't happen on LinkedIn. So I want to figure out, what is that? And how do I find it? And, how do I make sure the HiBob community has access to that sort of, like, network too?
Well, always be curious. I like to say always, always, always be curious. Sarah Reynolds, thank you so much for joining me and my audience today on the podcast. Everyone out there, if this show resonated with you, leave a review rating. It goes a long way. You know where to find out more at thepodcast.com. Hey, hit me up. You know my email. It's Adam@NHP Talent Group. Give me some feedback. What do you think of this episode? Please share it. Remember, sharing means caring. Be good to yourself, be better to others, and catch us next week for another good episode of the podcast. Take care, everybody.
Wisdom is forever, but for us, it's time to go. Thank you for joining us. Luckily, we'll be back with our next episode soon, jam-packed with more incredible humans. Thank you for listening, subscribing, and sharing. To join the conversation, search the Podcast on LinkedIn. And to catch up on past episodes and more info, please visit www.thepodcast.com.